It might be a media organisation, but there's nothing the BBC loves more than positioning itself as the country's moral authority, its ethical arbiter, frequently touting their eternal loyalty to notions of balance, objectivity and impartiality. The corporation wants one and one thing only: your trust, the trust of the British public. Why though? Why does trust matter so much to the BBC? Well, in wartime, there's nothing more valuable than trust, especially if you're in the business of manufacturing consent for British interests, which are also often the interests of its allies like the US and Israel. We saw what was, in our view, a perfect example of this on the BBC website on Monday. "We're sinking deeper," the article headline announced. That's a quote from an Iranian featured in the piece, which is about how the country's residents are bracing for the infrastructure strikes threatened by Donald Trump. It's written by BBC News Persian's senior reporter, Goncher Habibiyazad. The article starts off with this: "Ordinary Iranians have been responding to US President Donald Trump's threat to destroy Iran's power plants and bridges unless it opens the Strait of Hormuz. Except you have to go a few paragraphs down to learn it's not necessarily ordinary Iranians the BBC has been speaking to." It then says this: "The BBC has managed to talk to several Iranians, all opposed the current establishment, even though it's very difficult to contact people inside Iran due to an internet blackout imposed by the authorities more than 5 weeks ago." So, the views in the article, despite what the headline says, aren't the views of ordinary Iranians, which you'd expect to be relatively mixed. Instead, they're the views of one part, an important part, but just one part, of Iranian society. And some of those views were very striking. This, according to the article, is what one anti-government Iranian said about the prospect of more intense US and Israeli attacks on their country. Radin, also in his 20s and living in Tehran, said, quote, "About them hitting energy infrastructure, using an atomic bomb, or levelling Iran, my honest reaction is that I'm okay with all of those." So allegedly, you have an Iranian telling the BBC they don't mind being nuked. And that quote was posted online with thousands of readers expressing their incredulity. Criticism of it racked up 13,000 likes and 350,000 views in a matter of hours. No wonder. It seems like a complete fabrication or the statement of a total lunatic. Center Iranian voices, they're asking to be nuked. Who are you to explain against what they really want? I can see the viral Instagram videos now. And it was one that strangely echoed comments made by Donald Trump on Monday.
You've said Iranians would be mad if you stopped these attacks, but why would they want you to blow up their infrastructure, to cut off their power? Wouldn't that be punishing Iranians for the actions of the regime?
They would be willing and it's suffering. They would be willing to suffer that in order to have freedom. The Iranians have, and we've had numerous intercepts. Please keep bombing. Bombs that are dropping near their homes. Please keep bombing. Do it. And these are people that are living where the bombs are exploding. And when we leave and we're not hitting those areas, they're saying, please come back, come back, come back. These are the people. I don't know what they do. All I can tell you is they want freedom.
Sure, many Iranians may want freedom. They might want a loosening of certain social restrictions. They might want to drink alcohol. They might want political reform of one kind or another, or maybe even a different system of government. But getting nuked isn't going to achieve any of that. Now, the BBC responded to the criticism they received online, though very, very quietly, changing Radin's quotes to this. Radin, also in his 20s and living in Tehran, said, "If attacking targets in the country brings down the Islamic Republic, I'm fine with that, because if the Islamic Republic survives this war, it will stay forever." The article appears to have been changed on Monday night, not a minor change, a very substantial change. It's a quote, remember, and one clearly in response to the BBC's audience finding the original unbelievable, frankly. And yet no correction appeared on the article until today, when the BBC published this. Update, 7th of April. This article originally included a longer quote from Radin, in which he spoke about the attacks on Iranian energy infrastructure and referred to the levels of destruction which he suggested would be personally acceptable to him to bring down the Islamic Republic. Radin's comments were made directly to the BBC and were initially included in full to illustrate the strength of feeling of some of those who opposed the country's leadership. However, after further review, This part of the quote was removed from the article due to concerns over the way in which the speaker expressed his views and the extent to which they reflected wider Iranian viewpoints. Well, none of the article reflects wider Iranian viewpoints. For one thing, as the author admits, when she says the quotes only came from one side, people who oppose the government. Now, we wrote to the BBC here at Novara Media. We sent them several questions. We asked them to verify that the "nuke me" quote in the original article was a sourceable and accurate quote given to their journalist. It's a pretty big claim, and it adds a veneer of legitimacy to horrors. We asked them to explain why quotes from pro-government or even anti-intervention Iranians were not included in the article. It's not like they're impossible to find. And we asked whether there is a general editorial guideline, formal or informal, in place against speaking with pro-government civilian Iranians. We received an answer that addressed none of these legitimate queries, we think so anyway, getting this boilerplate response instead. This BBC News article originally included a longer quote from Radin, in which he spoke about attacks on Iranian energy infrastructure and his own views on the Iranian regime. All his comments were made directly to the BBC and were initially included in full to illustrate the strength of feeling of some of those who are opposed to the country's leadership. However, after further review, part of his quote was removed due to concerns over the way in which the speaker expressed his view and the extent to which they reflected wider Iranian viewpoints. On 7th of April, an update was added to the online article highlighting this change to readers. We apologise that this wasn't done when the change was initially made. Basically, they just gave us their correction. And in neither of those, the public correction or what they sent to us, is there any mention of nukes, right? There's no mention of nukes, atomic weapons. And this is extraordinary. It is one of the most insane, deranged quotes I've ever seen from the BBC, ever. I can honestly say that. This is not hyperbole. Somebody saying they want their country to be nuked, or they're indifferent, actually, let's be honest, they're indifferent to their country being nuked, is an extraordinary assertion. They've then changed that quote. It's one thing to change it. They've changed it without even adding a correction or an editorial note. Here at Novara Media, if we change an article, let alone a quote, if we change an article, even if we just maybe amend something grammatically or make something clear by changing a phrase around, we have a note. If we do that multiple times, we have multiple notes. I find it extraordinary that Novara Media, which I care about deeply, of course, I helped start the thing, but I find it extraordinary that Novara Media, in this case, has higher editorial standards than the BBC when reporting on a war and seemingly legitimising the deployment of nuclear weapons on civilian populations. I find that extraordinary. Kieran, this is a really important story in a number of ways. I want to delve in a little bit deeper to the actual journalist in a minute, but it's almost like the BBC saying, we're not actually interested in fair, impartial journalism. It's as close as you can get to them saying, in my view, this is propaganda. We only spoke to one side, and they said something crazy, and then we changed it, and we didn't even say we changed it.
Yeah. Maybe about 4 years ago, I might have naively said to you, Aaron, oh, well, the BBC often confuses impartiality for neutrality, as Gary Lineker, of all people, ingeniously pointed out. And I'm sure that there's some of that goes on in the organisation, with some inaccurate reporting, this sense of, well, we need to try and find a middle ground. Our job is not to say whether it's raining or not, it's to find a middle ground between rain and no rain. Then, of course, the Gaza genocide happened, and the BBC's sort of steadfast unwillingness to report on what's happening in a way that treats the Palestinians as human beings. And I think that was probably a huge eye-opener. I probably wouldn't have said the neutrality past that, but just assume I would have. I think that was a huge eye-opening thing for a lot of people as concerns the BBC and its willingness to substitute the reality for a political agenda. The BBC has a political agenda. It has a political agenda because of the people in it, because of the kinds of people that get filtered into the BBC and work for it. It has a political agenda for a wider reason, which is that it's embedded in a society and it wants to please powerful interests. And it's fearful of powerful interests, by the way. That's not to make an excuse for the BBC. The BBC is fearful of powerful interests. It's fearful that private actors, entities will go to the next government, say that's a reform government, and it will get them to defund the BBC or destroy the BBC. Now, that's, again, I'm not making any excuses, but those are clear pressures which create a political agenda for the BBC to report on things in a certain way. And I would argue the BBC has a terrible record domestically as well, in domestic British politics with this kind of thing. Austerity and manufacturing consent for that. And so we don't need to go into all that. But what I would say is that actually on foreign policy, the BBC has a much more strident and stringent political agenda. You know, it's like an official heresy to say something against Israel. It's an official heresy to go against a war. Andrew Marr, the famous clip that we played on this show before, Michael talked about it. Andrew Marr talking about the war in Iraq being a victorious thing several months into the war in Iraq. He was only the BBC's most senior political correspondent, of course, totally irrelevant. Now that he's rowed back on it after 1 million people have died, it's all fine, isn't it? I mean, these things have real consequences. And so I put it back to you, Aaron, but trying to manufacture consent for a potential nuclear war is about as grave as anything as you can possibly imagine a news corporation or anything else doing.
Yeah. On the one hand, it's crazy, but on the other hand, it represents a complete continuation of everything they've already done.
Right.
It represents a complete continuation. It's totally predictable. I think many people in this country genuinely think that the majority of Iranians want to be bombed. They genuinely believe that. Yeah. They genuinely think the majority of Iranians want to not have clean drinking water, that steel and energy should be destroyed. Because all they see when they see Iranians in the media is Omar Jalili doing, Sandy Hook-style trutherism for the schoolgirls killed at Minab by the Israelis in the US, or actually probably the US Air Force from what we know. Or they see people on the Piers Morgan show who have literally no idea what they're talking about, like Elika Labon, with these ridiculous talking points about how actually 90% of Iranians want regime change. I mean, I can tell you right now, that's not true. It's not true. The Conservative candidate at the last Iranian election got 30 million votes. Add some more to that too. So at a minimum, it's twice that. At a minimum, I think it's far more than that personally. I think it's probably a third for, a third against, and a third in the middle. And the third in the middle, guess what happens to them when their country is literally bombed by foreigners? What do you think happens? What would happen in this country? If there was a Tory PM, and if Nigel Farage was the Prime Minister, I didn't like the guy, and we start getting bombed, what do you think I'm going to do? Yeah, get rid of Farage. By the way, this is a country that's sandwiched between Iraq and Afghanistan. They know what a failed state can look like. They've got Syria not far away. They take these things seriously. And I do think, frankly, it was very predictable. I think it was a matter of time. By the way, I think it'll happen again. I think we'll have people in the media saying that they want to be nuked. Center Iranian voices, wake up, listen to Iranians. They're saying we want to be nuked. It was a matter of time. Kieran.
Final thing on that. I totally agree with everything you said. And actually, the fact that audiences in this country, to the degree that they are susceptible to it, speaks to a very specific kind of racism. Let's call it what it is. It's a continuation of the imperial core dismissing colonial subjects as not three-dimensional, as not multi-dimensional people who actually want life and liberty in the same way that those in the imperial core want life and liberty. And when you dismiss the manufacturing of consent starts much earlier. When you start saying death cult, death cult, death cult, you synonymize this death cult platitude with Iran or with Gaza, then you start to see the people in those places as part of that death cult. They want death. They like death. It's a trope about the whole area. I know a lot of people in the Iranian diaspora say we're not Arabs, but through the prism of white European racism, it makes no difference. If you're brown, you're part of that death cult in that shithole part of the world, as they say, in inverted commas. That's it. It's as simple as that. And it doesn't matter how many news shows you go on begging for your country to be bombed from Connecticut or California. It's not going to change the way that they see you. They're going to see you as part of that morass. And one final thing I would say about that is, you can find 1 million quotes to back this up. This one's about the Palestinians, but it could just as easily be about the Iranians. Golda Meir, one of the most, I think, I've read many, many, many quotes by Israeli statespeople that I find utterly deplorable. And I think maybe one of the most deplorable I've ever read, one that stands out in my mind most, is going to my ear saying we can forgive them for killing our children, but we cannot forgive them for making us kill their children, talking about Palestinians. That's the mentality. And then, of course, it gets adapted into they use children as human shields. This mind mulch, this nonsense with absolutely no bearing in reality spreads.
We had Patrick Christie's from GB News on X earlier on, sharing videos of women and children going to various infrastructure sites as effectively human shields. And he's saying that this is evil, they're being forced to go. There's no evidence of them being forced to go. Maybe some people are. We have absolutely no evidence of it. They seem perfectly happy to be there. Again, I'm not saying that's the majority of the country. It may be a slim minority of the country, but those people seemingly want to be there. And I said to him, these people are willing to sacrifice themselves to their country. They know that if the grid goes down and clean water goes down and schools go down and universities go down, they're not going to have a country left. And they want to do their bit. And if you can pick up an AK-47 and you can fight, you're not going to do that. You're going to fight. Those people, a 30-year-old mum with 2 kids, can't fight. That's the sacrifice she feels that she can make. And I find it so interesting that the exact same people who would commend patriotism, people willing to sacrifice themselves to their country, when it's in Britain, you're the best of the best. But if it's a brown person willing to die for their country, if they're a patriotic person, if they're not just patriotic, but they're intelligent and strategic, which some elements of the Iranian state certainly have been in recent weeks, surprisingly so for the White House, surprisingly so for our media, they literally can't understand it. Not just can they not understand it, you're evil. So you get this incredible flip from Churchill, we'll fight them on the beaches, venerated. This is the apex of bravery and courage. But if an Iranian says that, we'll fight them on the beaches, this person is evil and human shields and they're a monster and we must kill them. I mean, wind this back, we are seeing the insinuation of the deployment of nuclear weapons against the country in the name of stopping them getting a nuclear weapon. Hundreds of years from now, people will look at this and they'll laugh. They'll say, what the hell? Who was so wrapped up in this nonsense to believe it? Many people do. Fewer than before, thank goodness, but many people do. Kieran, we're going to stick with the story just for one moment because I think this is a really important detail. This journalist, Gonsheh Habibizadeh, worked, it should be said, with Marjan TV. That's an outlet founded by expat regime change activists. She also worked for its subsidiary, Manoto TV, which has been described by Iranian academic Shahab Esfandiari as a, quote, pro-monarchy network with the mission of glorifying the Pahlavi dynasty, one of the worst dictatorships of the 20th century. In my opinion, that's all true. She's written also many articles for The Guardian. In a Guardian article on the Women Life Freedom protests, she claimed that Iranian police were shooting female protesters in the genitals. Instead of concrete evidence, she turned to a network of opposition-aligned doctors who insisted that security forces decided to shoot at the faces and private parts of women because they have an inferiority complex. Again, there's no evidence of this. We can't say things with any certainty. We're not there. But when you make these kinds of claims, you need a high threshold. And this particular journalist has now done this in multiple outlets in the UK media. This is in Grey Zone. Habibizadeh suggested her allegations had been confirmed by others. Quote, when our article was published, there were more people I saw that had the courage to also share their stories of how they were hit. However, most of them were anonymous users on Twitter. Her words. She's currently the BBC Persian senior reporter and freely admits she has no contact whatsoever with any Iranians who support the government and communicates exclusively with anti-government figures instead. Quote, all those I talked to inside Iran are against the current establishment, she revealed on April 4th. This is in Grey Zone. Now, as a journalist, you're entitled to do that. You can have a YouTube channel doing that, right? You could even be at the Daily Mail or the Times and do that, have an agenda. You're regulated, but fine. She's doing this for the BBC. This is meant to be public interest journalism. So you have an Iranian, she's born in Iran, she's come here, she wants to pursue journalism. That's fine, that's good, right? I'm half Iranian. She's worked for one outlet, which is pro-regime change. She's then gone to The Guardian, falling short of journalistic standards, frankly. She's then gone to the BBC and doing the same. in the context of a war on Iran. Now, this is really important. These are very high stakes. And she's dehumanizing a whole country, frankly. And it adds legitimacy to the kinds of things which otherwise people wouldn't accept. What do you think is going through her mind when she does this kind of journalism?
Well, that's a very, very difficult
Do you think she
question.
believes... This is a speculative question.
Yeah.
But do you think people can become so motivated with their political cause that they think they're doing impartiality when she has overtly said, I only speak to one side?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose a generous interpretation is that she has been radicalized by the pro-monarchist Iranian diaspora, let's put it like that, to such an extent that all of her kind of critical faculties have fallen away. And that when she gets, but I mean, she's a journalist, she's a senior journalist.
At the BBC, right?
I mean, that's the most generous interpretation. I'll come to the ungenerous interpretation in a second, which I actually think is the accurate one. The generous interpretation is that she has now eroded her critical faculties because she has spent so long in pro-monarchist Iranian diaspora circles, has maybe, seen offences committed by the regime, whatever, in Iran, and as a result has lost the ability to discern between things that meet basic journalistic standards and things that don't. And by the way, just on that, you're absolutely right. When we questioned the 30 or 40,000 figure, the Iranian regime killed 30 to 40,000 people, as is claimed in the days.
Well, Trump said 45. Just to be clear, Trump said 45,000.
45,000. Yeah. All we're doing is asking for the proof, and there is no proof. Every time I've tried to find the proof, I always hit a brick wall. And the brick wall is it's a Saudi-funded group that's making that estimate. You mentioned Elika Lebon. I saw her the other day saying, well, it's the hospitals. The people in the hospitals were reporting that. There's no evidence of that. Nobody has captured those claims anywhere from doctors and nurses directly in anything like the numbers that amount to anything approximating 45,000 or 40,000 or 30,000. All we're doing is asking for them to surmount the traditional burden of proof, which is if you're going to claim something, prove it. We're not saying it didn't happen. It's impossible. We're saying, no, you simply have to meet the burden of proof. And if we're going to, if anybody's going to give their consent to bombing a country, which I certainly wouldn't, but if you're going to give consent, then of course the need for that burden of proof becomes even more extreme. And it's as simple as that. The ungenerous interpretation, briefly, Aaron, is that she is committed to either to the Iran becoming a failed state, ostensibly her home country becoming a failed state. More likely, she's committed to regime change at all costs and is willing to sacrifice or is willing to bend the truth so that people are sacrificed in Iran in order to achieve that regime change. This is conjecture, but only one of those outcomes, I think, only one of them could be true, but one of them, I suppose, in some form must be true.
And by the way, it's a free country. You can do that. Right, you can be a mouthpiece for whoever you like. You can't do it with the BBC. That's the whole point. Yeah. And I should also say, that number about 45,000 people dying, there is no evidence for it. The best sources that you could look at are saying 7,500. By the way, still many people.
Yeah, terrible.
The Iranian government says 5,000, worse than Tiananmen Square. I mean, they would say that actually it was an uprising supported by external forces. There is some truth to that. And 5,000 people includes many people who were caught in crossfire or police officers, besieged, etc. Regardless, 45,000 people in 2 days is more people than died in the British Army in the first month of the Battle of the Somme. So I think anybody with any kind of common sense would immediately question that. And the fact that it's not by the media tells you a lot, right? And as you say, maybe 45,000 people did die. There's no evidence for it. And even reliable organizations who are not amenable to the regime, amenable to the Iranian state, based in the US, are saying 7,500. Other people say 3,000. The government, like I say, says 5,000. Now, you might be saying, people are dying. What difference does it make? I think they're saying 45,000 precisely so. 100,000 people dying in the weeks and months ahead doesn't sound so bad. Oh, well, there was a failed state. We turned Iran into Afghanistan. There's a civil war, but it started because they killed 45,000 people. It's inflated for a reason. Very similar story to the alleged beheading of babies in October 2023. And my own colleagues, Owen Jones, Michael Walker, Ash Sarkar, very prominently said, we need evidence for this. This is really important. not least because that would be horrific, but also there is a retaliation right now from Israel, and they're using that as the ethical basis to be vicious. When they kill children, they're saying, well, they beheaded babies, so an eye for an eye. Well, actually, it turns out that was completely made up. Never happened. And if you asked whether or not it was true in the opening days and weeks afterwards, you were called all manner of things. But actually, you were right to do that. And that's why I'm really happy to say I need evidence to see the 45,000 figure. This is really important. History can't repeat itself.